Welcome to Travel Italia, the show about travel in Italy. Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about Venice's new tourist tax. So what is it? How does it work? How do you go about paying this new tourist tax that's been implemented starting April 25th, 2024. So just about a week or so ago. So first of all, let me give you some context. So the city of Venice, as you probably know, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And just to give you some idea of how much tourism there is to Venice, last year there were 30 million visitors to the city of Venice. That's incredible. But of those 30 million visitors, only 2 million were, I should say, tourists that actually spent the night in the city. So the vast majority of tourists that go to Venice, are day trippers. And because of the huge impact it has on the city, a bad situation in the sense of there's obviously overcrowding and garbage to deal with and all that comes with having so many people visit a city, and not to mention just the wear and tear on this beautiful historic city. The city of Venice has decided to introduce this tax, and let's talk about how it works, where it applies, who it applies to. So let's get started. So this new tourist tax only applies to those people who are visiting Venice for the day trippers, who arrive in Venice between 8:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. They are doing this on a trial basis. So this is not something permanent. They are just testing the waters, so to say. And what they've done is they've taken 29 peak days from April to July 14th to be exact, to be part of this experiment. And so those peak days are the only days that you have to pay the tourist tax. And for the most part, those are weekends, okay? So if you happen to visit on one of those peak days, then you have to pay the tax. If you're visiting on a non-peak day, then you're exempt. You don't have to pay the tax. So how do you know if you're visiting on a peak day? Well, you have to go to the City of Venice's website, and which I'll provide the link in the show notes. And there it's pretty easy to navigate. You click on, make my reservation, and then a calendar pops up and shows you exactly which days you need to pay the tourist tax. So, if you want to avoid the €5 fee, because that's what it is, only €5 per person, then obviously you can just visit on a non-peak day. So what you do is you go to the website, you fill in a form, and then pay your fee, obviously, and this is per person. So if you are traveling, as a group, your family or what have you, friends, each person needs to have their own QR code. So once you pay, a QR code is generated and then it's sent to you by email. So you need to do this before you arrive, because if you try to do it once you arrive, it seems to me from what I'm hearing that it's not exactly easy to do. And the way they are enforcing this is they are posting people, city employees at the main train station, the main piazzas, and just randomly checking, okay? So you don't know, there is no, let's say, entrance into Venice where you have to stand in line and show your QR pass. It's not a theme park, although sometimes it feels that way. They will be just randomly checking. According to the authorities, it's someone wearing a vest that will be highly visible. So now, one question you might have is there a limit to how many people can enter on those peak days? And the answer is surprisingly no, which, to tell you the truth, I'm a bit shocked because if the objective was to reduce the amount of people that visit Venice, I don't think a €5 fee is going to stop many people. So, for whatever reason, they've chosen not to put a limit on the number of people who come to visit. Maybe they'll do that in the future after this trial period. Who knows? So you don't have to worry about, not being able to pay your tourist tax. There is no limit on those peak days. Another thing you may be wondering is if you're staying the night in Venice, you still need to have a QR code. You don't have to pay the fee because you're spending the night in an Airbnb or an accommodation of some sort. And in Venice, you're already paying a tax, a tourist tax applied to your hotel or your Airbnb bill. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. You still have to go to the website and get what's called an exemption code. So when you go to the website, there's two options, like pay for the tourist tax, and the other is exemption. So click on that and fill out your information and have your QR code ready. Okay, so you're not off the hook. It's a bit of a hassle, I have to say, but it is what it is. So what happens if you don't pay your €5 day tripper tax, or what happens if you don't get the exemption QR code if you're visiting and spending the night in Venice? Well, if you happen to get randomly checked and one of the city officials checks, stops you and asks you for the QR code and you don't have it, it's possible that you could pay a fine from 50 to €300. That's what they're saying publicly. Why it's 50 to 300, I have no idea, but that's a possibility. Now, are there any exemptions to this new €5 fee? Yes. If you're traveling with children under 14 years old, they don't need to pay the tax and they don't need an exemption QR code. So you just need to have some kind of documentation, passport to prove their age, and that's it. Also, keep in mind that this tax is strictly for those visiting the historic city center of Venice, okay? Not the islands. So if you're visiting the islands, you don't have to pay the tax. If you're passing through, say, the main train station in Venice to get to the islands, you don't have to pay the tax, okay? But let's say you're staying in Burano, one of the islands, and you want to go into town, into the historic city center of Venice for dinner or what have you. If you arrive after 4:30 p.m., you don't have to pay, but again, between 8 and 4:30 p.m., you have to pay this tax. So just keep that in mind. It's nice to know that you don't have to pay it for the islands. For those of you who are coming in from the islands to the city, you just have to remember to get your QR code. Now, what happens if you dutifully go to the website, pay your fee, get your QR code, and then you change your itinerary, you change your plans? Well, you can, according to the website, get a refund. So at least there is that option. I wanted to add also that from what I've heard from Italians, not just in Venice, but here in northern Italy, they're pretty embarrassed about this tax, and no one is pro this tax. So we're wondering here in Italy how it will go and if, indeed it's going to make a difference to control overcrowding, because that's the aim, is to reduce the number of people that visit Venice. But most people that I've talked to, I would say all of the people I've talked to, they're not quite convinced that a €5 tax is going to stop anyone from visiting Venice. Of course, everyone wants to save the city because it is just such a beautiful place. It's a place like no other in the world, and it deserves to be saved and protected and respected. In Italy, no one's convinced that this is the right way to go about it. And for those of you who are visiting Venice this spring or this summer, which will be high season, I don't want to discourage you from going, because it is really a spectacular, historical, just beautiful place to visit at least once in your life. But, there are some things that you could do to minimize your interactions with crowds. Well, first of all, you have to be okay with crowds if you're going to Venice. Secondly, I don't recommend going just as a day trip because, as I mentioned, of the 30 million people that visited Venice last year, most of those were day trippers. So that means because, for example, cruise ships pull into port and thousands of people get off the boat and spend the day in Venice, and of course then they get back on their boat and they're off to a new location or spending the night on the cruise ship. My point is that at night, when you're in Venice, it empties out. People leave because the majority are day trippers. So I want to encourage you, if you're going to Venice, spend the night in the old city, in the historic center of the city, because I have to tell you, it is absolutely magical in the evening when the crowds have left and in the morning before the crowds arrive. And it's just one of these things that gives you goosebumps as you walk down the streets and, there's not that many people on the streets. It's so enjoyable. That is the time where you can really, really enjoy Venice. During the day, the only places that are really, truly crowded are the most famous spots in Venice. So for example, Piazza San Marco, which is St. Mark's Square, where the famous St. Mark's Cathedral is. That during the high season, during the day, is packed. Also, for example, the Rialto Bridge, very famous bridge, especially at sunset during high season. It's hard to even stand on the bridge because it's so packed. But my point is that the rest of Venice is not like that during the day, during high season. So what you could do is just strategize a bit and say maybe visit St. Mark's Square in the evening around dinner time. It tends to clear out, or early in the morning. Okay, spend your day visiting other parts of Venice. There's so much to see and do that you don't have to spend all of your time in one little area of Venice. So I would encourage you to get lost in Venice because that is the best way to see the city. I can't tell you, I've been there about 6 times, I believe, and none of them were day trips. I've always spent the night there. And every time I've been to Venice, I get lost. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because every time I get lost, I discover something new. And the problem is that GPS doesn't exactly work well in Venice because there aren't that many cell towers. I don't know why. It's an old city. It's like a maze. But it's fun because you come around a corner and you see an unexpected bridge that you didn't know about, a building that you noticed, some restaurant or shop that is just off the beaten path. And so it's a lot of fun. And the nice thing is that eventually, the saying goes that all roads lead to Piazza San Marco, St. Mark's Square. In fact, on some of the buildings, you will see, Piazza San Marco and then an arrow, or Rialto Bridge and then an arrow. So even if you don't know exactly where you're going, look for these signs on the buildings, and that helps. So somehow I've morphed from how to pay the tourist tax to how to see Venice. And I don't know exactly how that happened, but it did. I hope it's been helpful for you, and I hope this new tourist tax does not deter you from visiting Venice. You just have to be smart, plan ahead, and like I said, time your visit to avoid the crowds. I wish you the very best during your trips. Buon viaggio. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for your support. Please do subscribe and share if this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for your time. Ciao.